Hey, what is going on guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 Jailbreak news update. Got a big one for you guys here in this video. So it looks like we might be getting a new exploit from TheFlow, perhaps sooner rather than later. So taking a look here, we got this tweet from TyphoonCon earlier today saying that PlayStation 4 kernel RCE will be presented by TheFlow at TyphoonCon 24. Early bird tickets are now on sale. How a successful exploitation of kernel vulnerabilities in a network protocol on the PlayStation 4 can be abused to achieve RCE with kernel privileges on the console, presented by TheFlow himself there. And if we take a look at the summary from TheFlow, it says, this talk will be about successful exploitation of kernel vulnerabilities in a network protocol on the PlayStation 4, which is based on FreeBSD. I show how internals of IPv6 protocol can be abused to achieve information leak and to redirect control flow to get RCE with kernel privileges on the console. The exploitation strategies may also apply to XNU as they share very similar code. Moreover, this exploit enables a jailbreak without requiring a user entry point such as a WebKit exploit, and that's a big deal right there. And this talk is taking place, I guess, May 30th or May 31st, 2024, so there are still a few months to wait here until we see this. And hopefully once it gets eventually published at some point on hopefully YouTube, we'll get the talk, or maybe the slides at least, and then perhaps other exploit devs in the scene might be able to figure out how to make their own implementation, and we could get a new jailbreak for the PS4. So that is very interesting. Now, first of all, there are quite a few people who seem to think that this is relating to an older exploit and not something new. And the reason for that is that it states that it is an IPv6 protocol, that the exploit works on for IPv6. And there are other IPv6 vulnerabilities that have been posted in the past. You can see there's this one here, there's this one here. So there's quite a few that are related to IPv6. So some people seem to think it's an older exploit. I don't believe that though, for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that this says it can be done without requiring a WebKit exploit, whereas previous vulnerabilities have required a WebKit exploit to be chained in order to create a full jailbreak. And this says it can be done without a WebKit exploit, which suggests it's something new rather than something old. Also, Flats, who is another exploit developer who's got more inside knowledge, seems to be suggesting that this is something new, not an older IPv6 vulnerability. So that is good news. It looks like this is something new. Now, the other great thing about this not requiring a WebKit exploit is it should work up to whatever firmware the kernel exploit works up to. Normally, you're limited by either the kernel exploit or the WebKit exploit. Like you might have a kernel exploit that works on 11.0, but the latest WebKit exploit only works up to 9.60 like PS3, and therefore the jailbreak's limited to 9.60. Whereas because this doesn't require a WebKit exploit, you could potentially jailbreak the console on whatever firmware the kernel exploit supports. Now, if we assume this is the same exploit that resulted in this report from TheFlow on HackerOne, the $12,500 report, then we can safely assume that this was patched in 11.02 on the PS4 and 8.40 on the PS5, because those were the latest firmwares when this was closed, and there haven't been any new firmwares that came out immediately afterwards. Normally what happens with one of these reports is that once the report's made, Sony will eventually fix it. They'll push out a new firmware update, and then they will ask TheFlow to confirm that the vulnerability has been fixed. And then TheFlow will test the vulnerability again on the latest firmware, and he'll confirm that yes, it's fixed, it no longer works, and then the report will be closed. So because 11.02 and 8.40 were the latest firmwares when this was closed, it's pretty safe to assume that that's most likely going to be the firmwares that it was patched on. Therefore, it's likely that this kernel exploit could work up to 11.0 on the PS4, and because it doesn't require a WebKit exploit, that could give us a jailbreak up to 11.0 as soon as we have access to it. Now, the PS5 is not mentioned in this. However, there was a CVE that was made public, a vulnerability report made public, that might be related to TheFlow's HackerOne report. Now, there are some disagreements about that because this specifically mentions that it uses IPv6, and yet the CVE is for a different protocol, a PPPoE and IPPP, not IPv6. So there's a bit of speculation on that, but there's too many coincidences in my mind for it to be unrelated. What I'm talking about here is that there was an anonymous reply to a wololo.net article from a user who linked to a vulnerability report from 2006 and claimed that it works on the PS4 and PS5 as a proof of concept. And if you go to the vulnerability here, it says it's for FreeBSD 4.11 through to 6.1. The PS4 runs FreeBSD 9. But it does say here that remote attackers can cause a denial of service, a kernel panic, obtain sensitive information, and possibly execute arbitrary code. So it could potentially lead to a kernel exploit. Now, initially this was dismissed because surely an 18-year-old exploit that was made before the PS3 was even launched surely could not affect modern consoles like the PS4 or PS5. However, lo and behold, after it was tested, it turns out it does actually affect the PS4 and PS5. There was a proof of concept implemented here, a Python script that you can use to test on your PS4 or PS5. So I went ahead and tested this on firmware 11.0, which should be the latest firmware before the TheFlows report was patched. So we want to go ahead and test that firmware, and it does in fact work. It sends the packets and crashes the console. You have to be kind of testing your internet connection and have it all set up correctly in order for this to work. But it does actually crash the console, as you can see here. And I also tested this on the PS5 on 4.03 just to see if it would work. And yes, it does in fact work on the PS5 as well. In the same exact situation, run the script, it sends the packets, and then the PS5 crashes. Now on the PS4, it doesn't always crash the console immediately. Sometimes you'll send it and it sends the packets and it doesn't crash. But when you go to restart or shut down the console, it will crash during the restart or shutdown process. So it does appear to work pretty consistently on the PS4 and the PS5. So I also went ahead and tested this on 11.02. I updated to 11.02, and sure enough, it does not work on 11.02. I tried multiple times, could not get it to crash. So it looks like it's been patched in 11.02. Apparently others have tested on like 8.40 and the latest firmware on the PS5, and it does not work on those either. So it appears to have been patched in 8.40 and 11.02, which lines up pretty well with when the TheFlows report would have been patched. So not only that, but you also have the fact that this can be triggered without the use of a WebKit exploit, just like the TheFlows exploit here can be triggered without a WebKit exploit. So it does look like this vulnerability may be related to the TheFlows exploit here. And the good thing about that is that even if this, as it states here, is only for PS4, the TheFlows only come out to talk about this on PS4, it does look like the vulnerability, if it is related to this CVE from 2006, then it does look like that vulnerability still exists in the PS5 up to 8.20, and therefore could potentially be utilized on the PS5 as well. So we'll have to wait and see for that. Now, another really interesting thing about this is that you can actually get the exploit to trigger during the boot up sequence of the console. So while the console is booting, I ran the script and it was able to crash the console during the boot up sequence. So if this can be, turned into a full kernel exploit at some point, then you could potentially jailbreak the console during boot up so that as soon as you boot up into the home screen, the console's already jailbroken. So you could just have like an ESP chip or a Raspberry Pi chip that hosts the Wi-Fi network that sends the packets to jailbreak the console and sends the payload and whatnot, and have the whole thing jailbroken as soon as the console boots up. That would be like the best case scenario. So yeah, anyway, really interesting stuff. We'll have to wait and see. There's still a lot of disagreements at the moment about whether or not this is an old exploit that he's doing this talk on, or whether or not it's something new. I think the evidence seems to support it's probably going to be something new. And then also the fact that, is it related in any way to the CVE from 2006? Obviously there's the discrepancy of this being for PPPoE and IPPP, not IPv6 like what this talk is about. And yet, for some odd reason, this CVE works on the PS4 and PS5 up to 11.0 and 8.20 and is conveniently patched in 8.40 and 11.02, the same firmwares that would have likely patched the TheFlows exploit. And also the fact that it can be triggered without a WebKit exploit, just like what the TheFlow's talking about here. So yeah, very coincidental if it's not related. And if you want to learn more about that 2006 vulnerability that affects the PS5 and PS4, wololo.net's got a great article detailing all about it. So you can definitely check that one out. I'll leave it linked down in the description. So the general TLDR for anybody who didn't understand any of that, it seems that we might get a jailbreak for the PS4 maybe around June for 11.0. Given how, depends how much information's given away in this talk, but we might manage to get one by then for 11.0, and PS5 is not known at the moment. It seems that the CVE from 2006 does affect the PS5 up to 8.20, but we don't know if it can be exploited, or because of the extra security measures that the PS5 has, it may be more difficult. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. But yeah, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.